The UV blacklight flickered on, bathing the community clubhouse in an eerie purple glow. Eleanor Vance, our HOA president, stood at the podium, a smug smile plastered on her face. With this new security system, she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the darkened room, we can finally expose the petty criminals hiding among us. What she didn't know was that the real criminal was already glowing. It was her. Her hands, her face, the front of her expensive blouse, all lit up in a spectacular constellation of guilt. How did I turn her own security theater against her? How did the Queen of Oak Creek orchestrate her own spectacular downfall? It started 3 months earlier, not with a grand plan for justice, but with a stolen box of my grandmother's medication. I moved to Oak Creek for my grandmother. That's the whole story. It wasn't for the obsessively manicured lawns that looked like they were cut with scissors, or the identical beige mailboxes that lined the streets like rows of tombstones. It was for Grandma Rose. Alzheimer's is a thief, you know. It sneaks into the mind and steals memories one by one, leaving behind confusion and fear. The world inside her head was shrinking every day, and my job, my only job, was to make sure that shrinking world was a safe and peaceful one. I'm a graphic designer. I work from home, which means my office is a laptop on a dining table, and my commute is the 10 steps from my bedroom. It was the perfect setup. I could be there for her, to make the tea just the way she liked it, 2 stirs clockwise, 1 counterclockwise, to help her with the jigsaw puzzles of puppies and kittens that she could still manage, and to just sit with her when the silence got too loud in her head. Our little rented house wasn't much, but it was our sanctuary, and our lifeline to the outside world came in cardboard boxes left on our porch. These weren't just Amazon splurges, they were special dietary supplements, memory care puzzle books, and most importantly, her medication. It came once a month, packed in a temperature-controlled box, a small miracle of modern logistics that kept the fog in her mind at bay, at least for a little while longer. The first package to vanish was a set of weighted blankets. They're designed to soothe anxiety, to create a feeling of being held, which sometimes helped her sleep through the night. The delivery app on my phone pinged. Delivered, left at front door. I went to look. The porch was empty. A blank slab of concrete stared back at me. I figured it was a mistake. Happens all the time. Maybe it was delivered to the wrong house. Maybe a well-meaning neighbor saw it and picked it up for safekeeping. I did what any normal person would do. I posted a polite message on the Oak Creek Community Forum. Hi everyone, I wrote. Just a heads up, a package of mine seems to have gone missing from my porch today. If anyone picked it up by mistake, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know. Thanks. The response I got wasn't from a helpful neighbor. It came 10 minutes later and it was chilling. It was from our HOA president, Eleanor Vance. Mr. Jennings, it read, perhaps in the future you should invest in a more secure delivery option, such as a P.O. box. Oak Creek prides itself on its safety and pristine reputation. Public insinuations of theft are unwelcome and can negatively affect property values. I read it twice. It wasn't an offer of help. It was a warning. It was a command. Don't you dare make our perfect neighborhood look bad. Don't you dare mention the ugly word theft. I wasn't asking about property values. I was asking about a blanket for my sick grandmother. I met Eleanor in the flesh the next day. In the flesh is the right term for it. She seemed less like a person and more like a collection of expensive procedures and fabrics. She was doing what she called her patrol, which involved walking the sidewalks with a clipboard and a measuring tape, inspecting lawn heights, and checking for unapproved garden gnomes. She was probably in her late 50s, but Botox had frozen her face into a permanent expression of mild surprise, as if she'd just been told the price of something and was pretending she could afford it. She was dressed in a crisp, white Lululemon outfit that had clearly never seen a drop of sweat. "Mark, is it?" she asked, without waiting for an answer. Her eyes scanned my front yard, and I could feel her mentally fining me for a dandelion she probably spotted near the curb. "I saw your little post. We have standards here in Oak Creek. Public accusations make the community look unstable. It affects everyone." She said everyone, but she meant her. "I wasn't making an accusation," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I was just asking if anyone had seen my package." She gave a tight little smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And I'm just suggesting that such matters are best handled privately. Perception is reality, Mark, and the perception we maintain here is one of order and security. It protects our property values." There it was again. Property values. She said it like it was a sacred text, the foundation of her entire religion. I just wanted my grandma's blanket. She just wanted her real estate portfolio to be safe. We weren't living in the same world. 2 weeks later, the big one happened, the one I dreaded. The temperature-controlled box with Grandma Rose's monthly supply of medication. My phone pinged at 2:15 p.m. Delivered. I was on a conference call, so I had to wait 10 minutes to finish up. The moment I hung up, I rushed to the front door and pulled it open. Nothing. Just the cold concrete of the porch staring back at me. The wind blew a few dry leaves across the steps. The box wasn't there. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my chest. This wasn't a blanket. This was essential. This was the chemical switch that kept the lights on in my grandmother's mind. This wasn't about property values anymore. This was a direct attack. I didn't even think. My feet just carried me. Down the sidewalk, past the identical beige mailboxes, and 3 blocks down to Eleanor's house. It was a modern monstrosity, all sharp angles and giant glass windows, looking more like a regional bank headquarters than a home. It was designed to intimidate, to scream, "I have more money than you." I jabbed the doorbell, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. A few seconds later, the massive door swung open. Eleanor stood there, holding a tiny, shivering dog that looked as perpetually anxious as she made everyone else feel. The dog was wearing a tiny cashmere sweater. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that could give you a toothache. "My grandmother's medication was just stolen from my porch," I said. My voice was tight but steady. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. It was a refrigerated package. It needs to be kept cold. She performed a perfect gasp, one hand flying to her chest in a gesture she must have practiced in a mirror. "Oh, you poor thing. That's just dreadful. Are you sure the delivery person didn't leave it somewhere else? Sometimes they hide them behind the bushes to keep them safe from porch pirates." She was talking to me like I was a child, a complete idiot who couldn't find a box on his own porch. The condescension was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. "I looked," I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "I looked everywhere. It's gone." She tilted her head, her expression shifting to one of pitying concern. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. "Well, that's what happens, I suppose, when things are left out in the open. This is precisely why the HOA board is pushing for all residents to install security cameras from our approved vendor list to protect us from outside elements." She emphasized the words outside elements and let her eyes drift over my simple t-shirt and jeans, a subtle, sharp reminder that as a renter, I was one of them. I wasn't a true resident. I was a temporary problem. I left her house feeling more furious and helpless than when I'd arrived. Her performance had been flawless. She was the concerned leader, the pillar of the community, and I was the hysterical, careless newcomer. She had a plausible explanation for everything, and an answer that always circled back to her own agenda. But in her smug performance, she'd made a critical mistake. She'd given me an idea. She'd mentioned cameras. So the next day, I bought one. Not from her approved vendor list, of course. I bought a small, discreet one online, a little black cube that was barely noticeable up under the eaves of the porch roof. It fed a live signal directly to my phone. I didn't tell a soul. I just set it up, aimed it squarely at my front steps, and waited. In the meantime, I had to call my grandmother's pharmacy and explain the situation. They were understanding, but rules were rules. I had to pay a ridiculous rush fee and an out-of-pocket replacement cost to get an emergency supply sent overnight. The bill was a sharp, painful sting, but the fear of what would happen if Grandma missed her doses was infinitely worse. That night, as I wrote the check, the anger in my chest burned hotter than ever. A week passed. I needed to test the system. I couldn't risk another shipment of medication, so I ordered a decoy, something harmless, a book on container gardening for Grandma, something for us to do together on her good days. At 11:02 a.m. the following Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected at your front door. I was in my office, working on a logo design. My breath caught in my throat. I tapped the notification, and the live feed opened. The delivery driver was just walking away. The small, rectangular box sat in the center of my doormat. I kept the feed open, my heart starting to pound. I waited. 5 minutes went by, 10. Then I saw her, Eleanor Vance, in her stupidly expensive yoga pants and a visor the size of a satellite dish, was walking down the sidewalk, pretending to be on her phone. She walked past my house, then paused. She turned, her eyes scanning the street like a predator surveying its territory. Seeing no one, she walked up my driveway as if she owned the place. She didn't hesitate, she didn't look around. She just casually scooped up the box, tucked it under her arm, and walked away, disappearing around the corner. The camera caught everything in crystal clear high definition. It caught the way she glanced around before she stepped onto my property. It caught the entitlement in her stride. And most importantly, as she turned to leave, it caught the smug little smirk on her face. It was all the proof I needed. I had her. Cold. But I knew, deep down in the pit of my stomach, that in a world like hers, proof and justice were two very different things. With the video file saved on 3 different devices, my phone, my laptop, and a cloud server, I drove to the local police station. I walked in with a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in weeks. This was it. This was the end of it. Clear video evidence. A woman, the HOA president no less, walking onto my property and taking a package that didn't belong to her. It was an open and shut case. Theft, larceny, whatever you wanted to call it, it was a crime. I sat down across a metal desk from an officer who looked like he'd been counting the seconds until his retirement for the last 10 years. His name tag read Miller, and he had a coffee stain on his tie that looked like a tiny brown map of a forgotten country. I explained the situation calmly and played the video for him on my phone. He watched the 1-minute clip, his face completely impassive. He didn't raise an eyebrow, he didn't purse his lips. He just watched. When it was over, he handed my phone back to me across the desk. "Okay," he said, his voice flat with a boredom that felt ancient. "So you have a video of her picking up a package from your porch?" "Yes," I said, my confidence starting to waver. "Stealing it. It's theft." He let out a sigh, the sound of 1,000 crushed hopes escaping his lungs. "Look, son, it's not that simple. Intent is everything in these situations. She's the HOA president, you said?" "Yes, but what does that—" "Her lawyer," he cut me off, "could easily argue she was securing a misdelivered package for safekeeping, that it's part of her community duties to prevent porch piracy. Did you see her open it in the video? Did she ever confess to you that she was stealing it?" "No, but she walked up and took it." I was starting to get frantic. "She's been doing this for weeks. She took my grandmother's medication." "Do you have video of that?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "No, I installed the camera after that happened." He leaned back in his squeaky chair. then you have no proof she took the medication. You only have proof that she picked up this one package, a book. For all we know, she has it sitting in an HOA office waiting for you. Without proof of intent to deprive you of your property permanently, it's your word against hers. It's a civil matter. A civil matter. The three most infuriating words in the English language. It was the official code for, "This is not my problem." He took down a report, gave me a case number that I knew would just disappear into a filing cabinet, and handed me a pamphlet for small claims court. It was like being mugged and then being handed a coupon for a free Band-Aid. I walked out of that police station feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. My next stop, my last hope for a sane resolution, was the monthly HOA board meeting. It was held that evening in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of industrial cleaner and quiet desperation. I thought if I presented the evidence directly to the other board members, to her peers, they would have to act. They couldn't ignore a video of their own president committing a crime. Eleanor was presiding over the meeting like a queen holding court. She sat at the head of a long table, flanked by two other board members who looked like her loyal, spineless vassals. When the floor was opened for resident concerns, I stood up. My voice was shaking a little, but I pushed through. I explained the ongoing issue of package theft, careful not to name her directly at first. Then I said, "I recently installed a security camera, and I believe I have identified the person responsible." A wave of uncomfortable silence fell over the room. All eyes were on me. Eleanor didn't even flinch. She just watched me, that look of mild surprise frozen on her face. I held up my phone and played the video. I angled it so the other board members could see. I saw a flicker of shock in their eyes. They knew it was her. They knew. When the video finished, I looked directly at Eleanor. The room was dead silent. This was her moment to confess, to apologize, to make it right. Instead, she laughed. It was a short, dismissive little chuckle. "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly. "Mr. Jennings, I was going to speak to you about that. Your package was left in plain sight on your doorstep, a clear violation of Rule 7B, subsection C, regarding temporary exterior clutter. I simply moved it to the HOA office for you to pick up at your convenience. You should be thanking me for my vigilance." She was lying through her perfectly white teeth, and everyone in that room knew it. But they were terrified of her. The other board members suddenly became intensely interested in the papers in front of them. My neighbors stared at their laps. No one would meet my eye. And then she turned the tables on me. Her voice dropped, turning from dismissive to cold steel. "What we should be discussing," she announced to the room, "is the official report I received today about an unauthorized security camera being installed on the exterior of a residence without prior submission and approval from the HOA Architectural Review Committee, a clear violation of Bylaw 11A." I stood there, stunned into silence. She was using the rules to punish me for catching her breaking the law. It was breathtaking in its audacity. The system wasn't just broken, it was her personal weapon. I walked out of that meeting defeated, humiliated, and with a sickening clarity. I was completely and utterly on my own. The next morning, it got worse. There was a notice taped to my front door, a fine, $200 for the unapproved camera modification. Taped right below it was another one, $150 for improperly stored recycling bins, which had been sitting out for 3 hours before trash pickup. She wasn't just stealing from me anymore. She was trying to bleed me dry, to harass me, to fine me, to crush me under the weight of her petty, tyrannical rulebook until I packed up and left. She was making it clear. And that's when I decided to stop playing her game. If the rules were her weapon, I would have to invent my own. If the system was a joke, I would write a better punchline. I sat there on my couch, the 2 violation notices in my hand, feeling flimsy and pathetic. But they represented something heavy. They were the embodiment of a system designed to protect a predator like Eleanor, not a person like me. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The hot, frantic anger that had been boiling in my gut for weeks didn't disappear. It just cooled. It hardened into something solid, heavy, and patient. It hardened into resolve. Eleanor wasn't a common thief. A common thief steals for money or for the thrill. Eleanor stole for power. The packages were just a symptom. The fines, the public humiliation, the gaslighting, those were the real crimes. She was a bully who cloaked herself in the language of rules and procedures, using the bylaws of a suburban neighborhood as her personal scepter. Fighting her with more rules, with more appeals to a system she controlled, was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It was pointless. I had to use a language she couldn't control. I had to create a form of evidence so absolute, so visceral, so deeply and personally humiliating that no slick lawyer could spin it and no terrified board member could ignore it. The goal was no longer to get my packages back or to get the police to do their job. The goal was to expose her, to tear down the facade of the perfect, respectable community leader and show everyone the petty, ugly tyrant hiding underneath. I'm a designer. My entire world revolves around color, light, and perception. It's about how things look, how they make you feel. How could I use that? My mind started racing, connecting dots. I had to mark her. I had to make her crime visible to the entire world. I started my research. My first thought was glitter bombs. They're satisfying, for sure, but they felt juvenile. Messy, but temporary. Stink sprays were the same, a momentary discomfort, but easily washed away. I needed something more permanent, something more elegant. I spent hours diving into the weird corners of the internet, from theatrical supply websites to chemistry forums. And then I found it. Buried deep in a forum for amateur forensic scientists, a thread about tracking and tracing compounds. That's where I discovered UV reactive dye. It wasn't a glitter bomb. It was something far more insidious. It came in the form of a fine micronized powder. To the naked eye, in normal light, it was almost invisible, a faint, dusty residue at worst. But under an ultraviolet blacklight, it fluoresced with an unholy, brilliant intensity. It's the kind of stuff used to mark bait money in a bank robbery, to dust evidence at a crime scene. And here was the beautiful part, the detail that made me smile for the first time in days. It binds chemically to skin oils and keratin in fabrics. It's notoriously, fiendishly difficult to wash off. In fact, the more you scrub with soap and water, the more you just smear it around, embedding it deeper into the pores of your skin. It was perfect. It was subtle. It was poetic. She was obsessed with appearances, with maintaining a pristine image. I was going to paint her with invisible guilt. I spent the next 2 days assembling my shopping list. It was a strange collection of items that, if viewed together, would probably put me on some kind of government watch list. I ordered the UV powder itself, a specific shade called Brilliant Blue, from a specialty chemical supplier that usually sold to crime labs. I bought a small spring-loaded deployment mechanism from an electronics hobbyist store, the kind used to pop open a prize box. I found a tiny pressure sensor online, and then came the most important part, the decoy. I needed bait that Eleanor, with her obsession with status and luxury, would find utterly irresistible. I chose a brand of ridiculously expensive, organic, anti-aging face cream, the kind of stuff sold in minimalist white jars for $200 an ounce. The kind of thing she would see as a status symbol she was entitled to, a small treasure she could steal without a second thought. The bait had to be as perfect as the trap. My garage became my alchemist's workshop. For a week, surrounded by lawn equipment and old paint cans, I became a mad scientist, fueled by black coffee and a burning desire for payback. My design was simple in concept, but tricky in execution. The first prototype was a spectacular failure. I misjudged the tension of the spring. When I tested it, the mechanism fired with too much force, and I ended up with a fine, invisible dusting of brilliant blue powder all over my left arm and half of my workbench. I spent the next hour under a small UV pen light I bought, scrubbing my skin raw in the utility sink, laughing at the cosmic irony of it all. My arm glowed like a prop from a sci-fi movie. It took 3 days for the glow to completely fade. But the second prototype, that one was a work of art. I carefully built the entire mechanism into the false bottom of the face cream box. I hollowed out the cardboard, reinforced it, and nested the device inside. The pressure sensor was the key. I calibrated it so that it would arm the device the moment the package was lifted off a surface, my porch. The trigger wasn't the sensor itself, that was just the safety. The actual trigger was wired to the inner flap of the product box. The moment she lifted that flap to get to her prize, a small, pressurized capsule of CO2 would release a silent, invisible cloud of the UV powder. It would be a soft piff, barely audible, coating her hands, face, and clothes. She wouldn't feel a thing. She wouldn't see a thing. The trap was built. The bait was ready. All I needed now was the perfect stage for the grand reveal. And then, as if delivered by the gods of poetic justice themselves, Eleanor handed it to me on a silver platter. An email landed in my inbox, addressed to all residents of Oak Creek. The subject line was written in all caps, of course, Urgent, Community Safety and Anti-Theft Initiative Meeting. I opened it. She was hosting a nighttime town hall in 2 weeks' time. The purpose? To unveil her new high-tech security plan to combat the recent unfortunate incidents in the neighborhood. And the centerpiece of her presentation, the grand finale, was the purchase and demonstration of new state-of-the-art portable UV blacklights for the volunteer security patrol. I read the email once, then I read it again, and then I leaned back in my chair and I started to laugh. A deep, slow, triumphant laugh that started in my belly and filled the quiet house. She was providing the stage, the audience, and the spotlight. She was going to be the star of her own show. For the next 2 weeks, I became the model resident. I played the part of the beaten dog with Emmy-worthy dedication. I wrote a check and paid the absurd fines without protest. I climbed a ladder and took down my little black cube of a camera. I went completely silent on the community forum. From the outside, it looked like I had given up, that Eleanor's campaign of harassment had worked. I wanted her to think she'd won. I wanted her to get complacent, to let her guard down. Every morning, I'd see her on her patrol, and she'd pass my house and give me this tight, triumphant little smile. It was the smile of a predator who had successfully driven a rival out of her territory. She had no idea that I was smiling right back on the inside. I was letting her get comfortable, letting her think the prey had given up the fight, all while I was sharpening my claws. The day before her big community safety meeting, I executed the final phase of the plan. I went online and ordered the actual $200 jar of face cream. I paid the extra fee for guaranteed next-day delivery. I tracked the package obsessively, watching its journey from a warehouse in Nevada to a distribution center in my state, and finally onto the truck for delivery. It arrived at 10:30 a.m. The delivery driver placed it on my mat, took his picture, and drove off. I waited 10 minutes, a period I'd calculated was long enough for Eleanor to have potentially seen it on her morning rounds. Then I opened my door, quickly picked up the real package, and swapped it with my rigged box. It was a perfect replica. The weight, the feel of the glossy cardboard, the shipping label I had painstakingly recreated, it was flawless. I placed it in the exact same spot on the doormat. The stage was set. The trap was baited. Now I just had to wait for the actress to take her mark. I watched from my office window, which had a clear view of the street. My heart wasn't racing with anxiety anymore. It was pounding a steady, heavy rhythm, like a drum beating before a battle. It was almost 11:15. She was running late for her usual patrol. For a split second, a sliver of doubt pierced my resolve. What if she didn't do it today? What if, for some reason, she'd decided she'd had her fill of petty theft? And then I saw it. Her sleek, silver SUV pulled up to the curb a few houses down. She got out, her phone pressed to her ear, putting on a show of being a very busy, very important person. She walked her usual route, her sharp eyes scanning every lawn, every mailbox, every window. Then she saw it. The box. I could see her body language change, even from a distance. She paused her fake phone call. Her stride broke. She glanced at my house, her eyes scanning the windows, the roofline where the camera used to be. Seeing nothing, her confidence returned. With that same casual arrogance, that same breathtaking sense of entitlement, she turned and walked straight up my driveway. She didn't look back. She scooped the box up, tucked it under her arm, turned, and walked back to her car, as calmly as if she were retrieving her morning paper. The moment the box left the concrete of my porch, I knew the tiny pressure sensor inside had registered the change. The trap was armed. She got in her car, placed the box on the passenger seat, and drove away. There was no going back now. That night, I put on my nicest shirt, a simple dark blue button-down. I wanted to look respectable. I wanted to look like a calm, rational member of the community. I walked the 3 blocks to the clubhouse. The air was cool and still. Inside, the room was already buzzing with people, a bigger turnout than I had ever seen at one of these things. Her email about crime waves had clearly worked. Eleanor was at the front, standing behind the podium, glowing with self-importance. She moved through the crowd, shaking hands, her face a mask of civic duty. She had no idea how literal that glow was about to become. The clubhouse was filled to capacity. At least 50 residents were crammed into the small space, sitting on folding chairs, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. Eleanor stood behind the podium, beaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "As you know, I and the entire HOA board have been working tirelessly to ensure Oak Creek remains the safe, pristine community we all cherish." She went on for a good 10 minutes. It was a masterwork of self-aggrandizing nonsense. She talked about property values, vigilance, the importance of conformity, and the unfortunate rise in petty crime that threatened their peaceful way of life. I sat in the back, near the door, and just watched her. I didn't feel nervous. I felt a strange sense of calm. The plan was in motion, and it was completely out of my hands now. My eyes scanned the front of the room, and there it was, sitting on a small table behind the podium, next to a stack of flyers about her new security initiative, was the empty box for the face cream, my bait. She must have taken it home or opened it in her car, unable to wait to inspect her prize. The invisible trap had been sprung hours ago. She had been walking around all day, marinating in her own guilt. "And now," she said, her voice swelling with theatrical flair, "I'd like to unveil the centerpiece of our new security initiative." On cue, 2 of her board member cronies wheeled out a metal cart. On it were several large, industrial-looking black lights, the kind you see in crime shows. "These state-of-the-art UV lights," she explained, gesturing to them proudly, "will allow our volunteer security patrol to spot anything out of the ordinary during their nightly rounds. They can detect certain organic fluids, synthetic fibers, and even invisible forensic markers used by law enforcement." My heart was hammering now, a fast, triumphant beat against my ribs. This was it. It was better than I could have possibly planned. She wasn't just walking into the trap, she had built the trap herself, bought the key with community funds, and was now inviting an audience to watch her step on the pressure plate. "Let's give you all a little demonstration of their power," she announced, a wide, confident smile spreading across her face. "David, could you kill the main lights, please?" A man near the front flicked a switch on the wall. The room plunged into darkness. A few people gasped, their nervous energy filling the void. Then, with a loud electrical hum, the UV black light switched on. The room was flooded with a ghostly purple light. White shirts, teeth, and the lint on people's sweaters glowed eerily. It was a strange, surreal scene. And then, everyone saw it. At the podium, Eleanor Vance was glowing. It wasn't a subtle shimmer, it was a blazing, undeniable aura. Her hands, the same hands she'd used to open the box, glowed a brilliant, spectral blue. But it wasn't just her hands. When she'd opened the box, the fine powder had puffed up into her face. There was a glowing blue outline around her mouth and nose. A fine dusting of it shimmered on her cheeks and forehead. The front of her expensive silk blouse, where the powder had settled, was a spectacular, incriminating, brilliant blue constellation of guilt. She hadn't realized it yet. She was still smiling her smug smile, looking out at the sea of shadowed faces. "You see," she said, her voice full of pride. "With this technology, any foreign material, any evidence of tampering or trespassing will be instantly visible to our patrol." A woman in the front row, Mrs. Gable from down the street, pointed a trembling, glowing finger. Her voice was a hushed whisper that somehow carried through the entire silent room. "Eleanor, what's on your hands? Your face." Eleanor's smile faltered. She looked down at her own hands. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the black lights. She saw them. She saw her own 2 hands glowing like they'd been dipped in liquid moonlight. Her mouth fell open. She slowly raised a hand to her face, a gesture of pure, dawning horror. Her glowing blue fingers touched her cheek, leaving new, brighter streaks across her skin. The panic that flooded her eyes was more satisfying than any court-ordered restitution, more complete than any shouted apology. The room erupted. It started as a wave of whispers, then grew into a roar of hushed accusations. People were pointing, pulling out their phones. The petty criminal she had vowed to expose was right there, lit up like a radioactive Christmas tree at her own press conference. She started stammering, her composure shattering into a million pieces. It's a prank. Someone is trying to frame me. This is a setup." She started frantically rubbing her face with her hands, but it only made it worse. The more she rubbed, the more the fine powder smeared, the brighter it seemed to glow, embedding itself into her skin. She looked like a Jackson Pollock painting of shame. I didn't need to say a word. I just stood up from my chair in the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at me. I held up my phone, the screen bright in the dim room, and I hit play. On the screen, in crystal clear video, was the footage of Eleanor Vance in the bright light of day, walking up my driveway, stealing the box from my porch, and walking away with a smirk on her face. The video, combined with the glowing evidence smeared all over her body, was absolute. It was irrefutable. It was justice, served under a blacklight. Her cronies, seeing the game was up, scrambled to the wall and flicked the main lights back on. The purple glow vanished, but the image was burned into everyone's retinas. Eleanor Vance stood there, exposed, humiliated, hyperventilating in a room full of people she used to rule with an iron fist. Her reign was over. And the most beautiful part of it all, she had paid for the lights herself. The chaos that erupted was instantaneous. The meeting didn't just end, it imploded. The other board members, the 2 men who had been her loyal lapdogs just minutes before, were now distancing themselves from her like she was radioactive, which, in a way, she was. David, the one who'd flipped the light switch, was the first to turn on her. "Eleanor, I think you need to explain yourself," he said, his voice laced with a newfound shaky authority. "The board cannot condone this kind of behavior." It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to save his own skin, and everyone saw it for what it was. Eleanor rounded on him, her face a mess of smeared makeup and invisible dye. "You work for me!" she shrieked, but the power in her voice was gone. It was just noise now. Mrs. Gable, the woman from the front row, stood up. She was a quiet widow who Eleanor had once fined for having unapproved seasonal gourds on her porch. "I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the president," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Seconded!" someone shouted from the back. It all happened in a blur. A motion was made. A vote was called. Hands shot up all over the room, a forest of righteous indignation. It was unanimous. Right there, under the harsh fluorescent lights of her own failed security demonstration, in the room she had ruled for years, Eleanor Vance was stripped of her title. She tried to storm out, shouting about lawsuits and defamation and how we would all be hearing from her husband's lawyers. But no one was listening. They were all too busy looking at their phones, sharing the videos they'd just taken, texting their neighbors who hadn't come. Her threats were empty. Her power had been a collective illusion, and we had all just decided to stop believing in it. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was just a woman who stole things, standing in a room full of her former subjects. By the next morning, it was everywhere. The story had escaped the confines of Oak Creek and was rampaging across the local internet. The glowing Karen of Oak Creek. Someone had edited my porch video side by side with a shaky cell phone clip of her glowing under the blacklights at the meeting. It was a masterpiece of digital karma, a viral diptych of crime and punishment. Local news blogs picked it up. It was shared in neighborhood groups all over the city. Her carefully curated image of the perfect, powerful suburban matriarch was shattered in a single night, replaced by the meme of a glowing, ranting thief. But something more important, more real, was happening inside Oak Creek. The fear was gone. It had evaporated overnight, burned away by the purple glow of those UV lights. People started talking, really talking, for the first time. It turned out I wasn't her only victim. I wasn't even close. Mrs. Gable's story about the gourds was just the beginning. The Miller family, who were renters like me, had been fined into near bankruptcy over the color of their kid's tricycle. An elderly man who lived on a fixed income had been threatened with a lien on his house because his garden hose wasn't coiled in a perfect circle. My story just opened the floodgates. An emergency board meeting was convened a few days later, this time without Eleanor. For the first time, it was filled with people who actually seemed to care about the community, not just the abstract concept of property values. A week after the meeting, there was a soft, hesitant knock on my door. I opened it, and it was Eleanor. The change was shocking. She wasn't glowing anymore, but her skin looked scrubbed raw, red and irritated. Her hair was a mess, pulled back in a sloppy ponytail. She wore no makeup, and without it, she looked her age. She looked diminished. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't look me in the eye. Her gaze was fixed on a crack in my porch concrete. "What I did was wrong. I'm sorry." I just nodded. I waited for the surge of anger, of triumph, but it didn't come. I just felt a sort of hollow pity. This woman, who had seemed so large and powerful, was now just a sad, broken person standing on my doorstep. "Why?" I asked. It was the only question that still mattered. Why my packages? Why my grandmother's medicine? Her eyes finally met mine, and they weren't filled with malice or arrogance anymore. They were filled with a strange, twisted kind of shame. I was trying to protect this place," she whispered, the words sounding absurd even as she said them. "My husband and we built our lives here. I saw things changing, people moving in who needed more, needed care." She stumbled over the words, as if they were distasteful to her. "I thought, If things started to look messy, if people saw that this was a neighborhood where people needed care, it would bring everything down. The values, the reputation. I finally understood. In her warped mind, my grandmother, with her illness and her special deliveries, wasn't a person. She was a liability, a blemish on the perfect, pristine face of Oak Creek. She was so obsessed with the illusion of a perfect neighborhood that she'd become the one thing that was truly ugly and rotten within it. Her husband's prestigious real estate firm dropped him a few days after the story went viral. The bad press was too much. They put their glass and steel monstrosity of a house on the market a week after that. A moving truck came a month later, and then they were gone. Just like that. The monster had been vanquished. But the story wasn't quite over, because what replaced her was something she never would have understood in a million years. The new HOA board's first official act was to take the thick 3-ring binder that contained Eleanor's book of petty aesthetic finds and ceremonially drop it into a recycling bin. Their second act was to start a community fund, using some of the surplus HOA dues to help residents with emergency repairs or accessibility modifications, like wheelchair ramps. They organized a neighborhood watch that was actually about watching out for each other, not spying on each other for infractions. People started hosting block parties. The cold, sterile perfection of Eleanor's reign was replaced by the warm, messy, vibrant reality of a real community. The sound of silence was replaced by the sound of kids playing in the street and neighbors laughing over a shared fence. Life for me and Grandma Rose went back to being quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a peaceful quiet, not a fearful one. Packages arrived without incident and would sometimes be brought to our door by a neighbor who saw the truck pull up. I could focus on my work, and more importantly, on my grandmother. Her good days were fewer now, the windows of clarity shorter and farther between. But in the peaceful atmosphere of our little home, in a neighborhood that finally felt like one, those good days were beautiful. She would sit on the porch swing with me in the late afternoon, watching the world go by. Sometimes she'd see a neighbor walk past with their dog, and she'd smile, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. And that was the only victory I had ever really wanted. Eleanor Vance thought power was about control, about rules, about forcing the world to fit her perfect, sterile image. But she was wrong. Real power is about community. It's about people choosing to look out for one another. It's about standing up to bullies, not with fists or with shouting, but with cleverness, a little bit of patience, and a healthy dose of science. She wanted to purge the neighborhood of what she saw as its imperfections, but in the end, her actions purged the neighborhood of its one real poison, herself. And it all started because she underestimated a quiet graphic designer who just wanted to take care of his grandma.